This week I'm going to be continuing work in the rooms that I've been working in the last 2 weeks. And because they're on this side of the house, I thought now was the perfect moment to make a more formal introduction to the church and the fundamental role it has in the history of the house. Coming up. Spectacular. At the start of the week, I'm going to be downstairs, and my main bit of work is going to be in the room through here, where I'm going to be taking all of the dirt off the floor to get down to the bedrock below. But before I can start that work, I've got to move all of these things back out here. So I need to do some work tidying up in here, and also some work tidying up in here. So in here is where my work for the week will actually start. In order to do work on the foundations in this room, I will need to take all of the dirt off the floor and get down to the rock. But because I need to use this room for some storage over the next few weeks, today I'm just going to take out as much dirt as I can while keeping the floor relatively level. I was able to take out quite a lot more dirt than I had been expecting. I didn't really hit the bedrock until this section here. So I did a bit more work than I expected, and it took a little longer, but I'm there now. So put a cover on and I can start putting stuff back in. Now that I've got everything off the floor in here, I'm going to quickly tidy up the surface, get a cover down, and then start bringing the things out of that room back into here. And with the cover now down, I can get on with moving this stuff out of this room. So now with everything out, it's back to some digging. Digging out the dirt from this room is just the first phase in work to make the foundations of this part of the house as level and as strong as possible. I'm also very interested in understanding the exact shape and position of the bedrock so that I can work out how much work might be required if I wanted to remove some more rock to lower the level of the floor in this part of the house. I've been making reasonable progress this morning. I've got about just over a quarter to go, and now that I can see much more clearly the lines of the rock, hopefully I'll be able to push into that corner pretty quickly. To give you a break from the digging, while that version of me carries on with the work, I'm going to give you an introduction to the church and this house's connection to it. It's actually much more than just a connection, because this house only exists because of the church, as it was built to be the home of the priest or rector of the church. So for a few hundred years, this house was a rectory, and the rector would have walked from the front of the house here up to the steps of the church here. The church is not as active as it once was, and now there is just one service a year at Easter time. But it's looked after by the bigger parish that it's now part of, with the support of one special local family in particular. After some burglaries in the past, it's now kept locked throughout the year. But the priest who is responsible for the overall parish, who is a lovely, friendly man, has given me his key so that we can take a look inside. The church has changed a lot over the centuries, but the services were probably quite similar to the annual service now. The congregation would have once been the families that lived in the farms and houses that are dotted around the local hills. And they would have filed in and taken a seat probably in their normal family pew. The priest would lead the service from the altar. And nowadays the service involves welcome, some prayers, a short sermon, a communion for those who want it, and some lovely chants by a small but quite elderly choir. The service is in Catalan, so I don't understand everything that is said, but the overall experience is very relaxed and sociable. Most of what I know about the church comes from this small book, which was written by a local writer who had a particularly deep love of the local culture and history. To write the book, he researched all the different parts of the church and looked at a whole lot of historical documents in various archives. From that archive material, the oldest document with a reference to the church is from the year 1019. So there's been a church of some sort on this location for over 1,000 years. But the book is very quick to point out that there have been many changes to the church over many centuries. One thing that hasn't changed over the last millennium is the name of the church, which has always been Santa Paiaia. Legend has it that Paiaia was a beautiful courtesan from Antioch about 400 AD, who became a devout Christian, renounced her wealth and lifestyle, and moved to Jerusalem, where she lived as a hermit for a number of years in the hills above the city. I don't think the reason for that saint's name being chosen for this church has ever really been known, but perhaps it was a connection between the hills and beauty. An unusual aspect of this church is its orientation, because most churches of this age and style have an altar that faces to the east. But in this church, the altar now faces to the west. I say now because it's thought that this area here used to be the altar and that it did face towards the east. But at that time, the church would have been in a much smaller space and probably had a very Romanesque design and might have only covered this area here underneath that vaulted ceiling. Other evidence of the church's original form and design are best seen from the outside. This small old window here is apparently very typical of a church with a Romanesque design. It would have had a tiny opening here which was bricked up many years ago, but it suggests that this might have been part of the original wall of the church when it was first built. Further evidence of how the church has changed over the years are this old opening, which has been covered in, and the fact that this probably would once have been a corner of the church based upon the series of cornerstones that now run through the middle of this wall. Further evidence of how the church evolved over the centuries can be seen in the different types of stones and patterns. This wall, for instance, has smaller and more irregular stones, whereas this wall here has much larger stones in a much more structured pattern. Back inside, and this time with some of the lights turned on, further evidence of how additions were made to the church are these side chapels here and there. This one in particular has a different vaulted ceiling to other parts of the building. An even bigger addition would have been this altar space here, which the book suggests was developed in the 1600s. And I think based upon some of the lines in the walls here, it would have originally have had a vaulted ceiling and may have been the reason why the orientation of the church changed to face towards the west. The book is less certain about the development of another significant part of the church, and that's the tower behind. The tower of the church, which runs from the base down there to a much higher point, can be seen from miles around. And the book suggests that it may well have been developed and added to over the years, with the evidence for that being different types of stones used in different parts of the tower. The stairs that take you up the tower are not for the faint-hearted, but let's take a closer look. Once you do get up here, the view is pretty spectacular. And just as you can see the church tower from miles around, from on top of the tower, you can see an awful lot, including the roof of the rectory. Here is one of the two bells in the tower. And here are the top of the stairs that I'm about to go back down. So I think it's a little easier coming back down the stairs. I hope that this short tour has given you a nice idea of both the beauty of the church and how much it has changed over the years. And I think those changes are probably just a really good reflection of how the area and its inhabitants have evolved over the centuries. Right up to the middle of the 20th century, when many families moved away and a lot of the farms were left abandoned. And with the population dwindling, the last full-time rector of the church who lived here left in 1959. This may have led to less money being spent on the maintenance of the church, but as I understand it, by the 1980s and 1990s, some parts of the church were in quite bad condition. And so a small but dedicated group of locals, led by one of the families that I mentioned earlier, they dedicated an awful lot of time, money and effort to repairing nearly all aspects of the church. And they did work on the roof, on the tower, on the walls and the floors. And I think that you'll agree from having seen the church just now that they did a fantastic job. I'm full of admiration for all of their work and really appreciate everything that they've done. And I hope that future generations, when they get to visit the church, will feel the same way. So a big thank you to those that did the work, sobretot a la familia Boadella. On a final note, while I head back to the house, while the church has undergone dramatic changes over the centuries, one constant throughout that time, at least until 1959, would have been the presence of the rector. And based upon archive material, the book has a full list of rectors from 1420 through to 1959. There are also a couple of references to a rectory in the 1600s, but the big question is, when did they decide to build this house? The book does suggest that the house was built in the 1700s, but for an exact date, I think the best evidence is up there. Because above me is a stone with an inscription, and apparently when rectories were built in the past, it was not unusual for the name of the rector at that moment to have their name inscribed above the door. On this one, I think it says 1714, Francisco Cuel, ROR. Now 1714 is a year of some significance to Catalonia, but that's a story for another day. But in relation to the age of this house, I think this inscription suggests that the house, this part of it at least, is at least 300 years old. Anyway, for now, I better get back to doing some work. I'm just checking that I'm digging in the right place. As you can see, I'm pretty much done. I've got a little bit more dust to pick up with a dustpan and brush, and then I would have finished. Having finished taking all the dirt out of this room, I'm now going to head upstairs and finish off some work that I started a couple of weeks ago. And for this work, I'm going to be taking out a lot more of the dirt above the vaults, not all of it, and tidying up the surface so that there's a little less dust blowing around in the house. After taking the tiles off the floor in this room and the other rooms above the vaults a couple of weeks ago, I met with my architect and a couple of others to discuss the next phase of work for the floors in these rooms. And they confirmed that the vaults looked in reasonable condition, but that they would all benefit from a load-bearing perspective to have that reinforced concrete shell added to them. So I will be doing that work with some professional help. And before I do that, I'll need to take the dirt off the top of all of the vaults. But the experts recommend that until I actually do that work, to leave a reasonable amount of weight above the vaults, especially around the edge, to ensure they stay compressed and strong, but that it was fine to take off a top layer of dirt, especially in the center of the room. I think I've taken off about the right amount of dirt. So now I'm just going to brush off this central part so that I can see the top of the vaults themselves. With the dust that I was putting in the air, I'm not sure how much you would have been able to see of the top of the vaults, so I'll let the dust settle and go back in there later to have a look. Now I'm going to do the same work in the room next door. In this room, a couple of weeks ago, I actually took quite a lot of the dirt off the center of the room, And you may recall that in this room, through the pattern of the tiles, you could see that there had once been partition walls, and I thought I had taken away all the evidence of that. But taking the dust off the top of the vault, you can see that actually there were additional strengthened tiles put on top of the vault where the partition walls had been. So now I'll carefully take the dirt off this bit, and then we'll have a closer look at what we see of the top of the vault. While I wait for the dust to settle in that room, I'm going to get on with the last bit of work for this week on the church side of the house, and that's to remove some of the dirt from this room here. I was hoping that once the dust had settled, I'd be able to show you really clearly the top of the vaults in the 3 rooms that I've been working in. But the truth is, it might not be that clear for you. However, I will try and give you a quick zoom in each of the rooms. The vault below this room is a barrel vault, so it runs from one side to the other as an arch. And if we zoom down onto the top of the vault here, you can see the tiles that make up the vault, but I appreciate it's not that clear. And then in this room, which has a 4-cornered vault, it's not that much clearer, and I tried to put some water on top just to the right there, but you can't see it much more clearly. But you can see the top of the tiles here, and you can see the line of extra bricks or tiles that the partition wall used to be on top of. And in this room, it's a pretty similar story. Even with the water that I put onto a few of the tiles, you can't see them that much more clearly, but you can make out the reinforcements that the old partition wall used to be above. So while I haven't been able to show you the top of the vaults that much more clearly, I have finished the task that I wanted to this week in the upstairs section on the church side of the house. And that was to get as much of the dirt off as possible and get them ready for removing the last bit of dirt for when we do the reinforcement of the top of the vaults. I thought I'd end the week where I started it, up here on the shed. Since then, there's been a lot of digging, a fair amount of dirt shifting, and then a lot of dust in the air. But I've achieved what I wanted to on the church side of the house, and I hope that you enjoyed the introduction to the church and the quick tour of it. I'm now going to go home and try and find out what exactly is on this bit of paper that I just found in the dirt in the room up there. And I'll let you know what I find next week. So tune in then.